Hello, I'm Julia McAleer, and I'm a teacher working towards my master's, and I am also the wife of a combat veteran. Our support group meeting was held on September 29th at 1:30 in the afternoon for an hour and a half in the lobby of the Carolina Performing Arts Studio. The chairs were set up in a semicircle. We used whiteboards, note cards, and pens, and candy for an icebreaker. I had 5 participants. There was no co-leader, and the setup for this was only for this assignment. I only knew one of the ladies in the group. The rest were parents of dance students at our studio, but none of them were my student. The purpose of this group was for military spouses of deployable soldiers who homeschool their children. They have unique stressors, and the group was to help them voice their concerns and struggles and share ideas. Group dynamics and content and process. When the spouses came in, I gave them a candy bar. We were going to do an introductory activity. So they were to find the other person that had their same candy bar type, and then they were to introduce themselves, tell how long they'd homeschooled, and tell a funny incident that occurred while homeschooling. This lasted about 5 minutes, and everybody seemed to be laughing and sharing and getting along well. There was a pretty positive vibe. One lady didn't want to share a story, so I intervened and began the next part of the session, which was a sentence completion activity. I acknowledged that they were military spouses and had unique burdens and struggles while their spouse was deployed because of the added stress of homeschooling. So I wrote on the board for them to answer on their card. My biggest problem I faced during my spouse's deployment is, while they were writing, I explained that during our conversation, the one person speaks at a time. Comments would be supportive, positive, and helpful, and personal disclosures should be kept confidential. After they were done writing, we went one at a time and they read off what their issues were. They brought up transportation of the kids, organization of their schedule and not getting behind on schoolwork, things breaking, cooking. Isolation was a big one. Many of them have moved every 2 years and found going deeper, having emotional ties was pretty difficult, and they became very self-reliant. So going deeper on this, I talked more about relationships, and I said General Van Antwerp had said that it's important for the health of the military family to maintain interfamily relationships while the soldier is deployed. So I asked them, how do you maintain your relationship with your spouse and your relationship of the spouse with your children while they are deployed? And the responses were all over the board, but it did get them talking on a deeper level. I would spur them on with questions like, oh, how so? Or that sounds frustrating. How did you handle it? Has anyone ever had a similar situation, and how did you get through it? Those were all of my deeper questions that I used. There was such a wealth of information there from the ladies. There was some ladies had their husbands deployed 11 times. So there was a lot of experience. Another issue that I brought up into the group to add on to that was reintegration of the spouse into the family after deployment. A lot of the ladies reacted, you could tell it was a big troublesome issue for them. So after I let them talk about how they felt like their spouse was an intruder, or how, they didn't understand, I asked the deeper question. I said, so what do you think you could do to help your spouse understand what's going on in the family, and how to help them feel more a part of the family? And the conversation that was generated and the ideas was very useful and gave a very positive feel for the group. Leadership techniques that I used obviously was the digging deeper questions, observing body language, trying to engage others into the conversation so no one would dominate, asking follow-on questions, cutting off. I had one lady projecting negative energy, and I had to move to another person to help keep the conversation open and going, so I didn't want anybody to feel alone or isolated. The participation from the group was very, very positive, and they were very willing, except for the one who had to she eventually came out of her shell and was more willing as we found a common connection. Self-assessment. Reflection on my performance. I think overall it went pretty well. The meeting pretty much ran the way I planned it. For example, the digging deeper questions on reintegration worked really well and gave them useful ideas. The challenges, because we were in the lobby, we got interrupted a couple times and people walked through, so it would stop conversation and I'd have to re-engage them. So if I were to do it again, I would make sure the room was isolated where people just, foot traffic couldn't just walk through. Another challenge was, the negative individual. I think having more experience on dealing with a negative individual would have helped me. It caught me off guard a little bit, but we were able to keep going and get her to open up. I think overall I was able to create a positive environment and help keep the meeting on the subject matter at hand. And I also think I did a good job at trying to look for the reaction of others in the group and pulling all members into the conversation. What I would handle differently. I think I would have planned the closing of the session better. Maybe used a round exercise where each person could give a one sentence piece of advice to a new wife in the military who had just started the homeschooling co-op. What advice would they give? In summary, I learned that people may have similar circumstances, but they have different perceptions and responses to events. In fact, some see themselves as victims, as loners that have to endure, and others will just lock themselves away from others. So discussion in group creates unthought of options for them. What I plan to apply to future group leadership. Planning for as many contingencies and scenarios as possible is important. Even though I planned, I still needed to learn more about how to handle and direct difficult people. Also, getting more practice asking clarifying questions, which could have opened communications quicker. Concluding statement. This exercise has been valuable in my pursuit to understand the human condition, especially as it relates to military deployments and the stressors that come with it. I think that before entering any group session, it's important to remember that no matter what issues or difficulties people face or may walk through, that I approach them with the mindset as stated in Ephesians 4:2. Be humble and gentle in every way, be patient with each other, and lovingly accept each other.